Welcome, and thank you very much for joining us tonight for Devon Fraser's presentation of her capstone research project, Assumption College Through the Decades. I would like to offer a few housekeeping details before we start. First of all, we'd ask that you please mute your microphone and turn off your camera. This will ensure optimum streaming for everyone. Also, in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you'll see an icon with view options. And for optimal viewing, we're going to recommend you use the speaker mode for viewing the presentation. Finally, after Devon's presentation, we'll have a question and answer period, and I will facilitate this through the chat. So you may answer or ask any questions you like in the chat, and we'll talk about those later. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations, which includes the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. And we respect the long-standing relationships with First Nations people in this place and our collective responsibilities to care for the land, the water, living things, and one another. And so on behalf of the University of Windsor, the Leddy Library, and the Outstanding Scholars Program, I would like to welcome you all. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to the Fraser family who's joining us, to members of the Assumption University community, and the Very Reverend Father Kevin Story, Superior General of the Congregation of St. Basil. We'd also like to extend a warm welcome to the family of George McMahon, who we believe are here tonight. And I would like to acknowledge the vital work of George McMahon to preserve this history. And he was a lovely man, and we miss him very much, as I'm sure you do as well. But tonight, it's Devon Fraser. And I had the very distinct pleasure of working with Devon for the past 3 years. And she'll present her capstone project, which she did as part of the work with outstanding scholars. At the end of Devon's presentations, I will invite Dr. John Cappucci, Principal and Vice Chancellor of Assumption University, to offer a few words and closing remarks. And after that, you'll have the opportunity to ask Devon a few questions. And again, please enter your questions through the chat box. Before turning it over to Devon, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Simon Dutoit to say a few words about the University of Windsor's Outstanding Scholars Program.
Good evening, and thank you very much, Heidi, for your introduction. And I just want to say what a pleasure it is to be here this evening at this celebration of undergraduate scholarship, which is it's very exciting for me. Devon Fraser came into the Outstanding Scholars Program in the fall of 2018 as a full scholar, and she's been working with Heidi since that time. She began work on a series of studies of Wilfred Boomer Harding, this famous baseball player who was based in Southwestern Ontario. And this was a great example of the kind of public history that the digital scholarship program at the Leddy Library has been so active in over the last few years. And for me, as a scholar in the arts and humanities, I find it a very exciting project. It is an opportunity for the University of Windsor to be part of the public history of this region. And I think it was really because of that historic angle that Devon decided to begin work with Heidi a few years ago, really because she's a history major and it was the history that brought her into it. But of course, since then, as is so often the case in the Outstanding Scholars Program, Devon's vision for her future and for what is possible through undergraduate research has grown exponentially. For those of you who may not know, the Outstanding Scholars Program places students in a direct research relationship with a faculty member who works at the University of Windsor, or occasionally with a research partner in the local community. That student is then paid to conduct research outside the classroom for 6 semesters in their second, third, and fourth year. So it's an excellent learning opportunity. And Devon is a great example of how much a student can grow through this program. And this is one reason why I really love being the coordinator of this program. It's because time and again, I have the opportunity to observe the research ingenuity of my faculty colleagues and to observe students discovering new pathways forward for themselves, pathways that neither I nor they had envisioned as even being possible in some cases. The Outstanding Scholars Program is available in every major on our campus. I know when we think of research, we may have this preconception that people have to wear a white lab coat and mix chemicals. But in fact, we are able to conduct research or original creative work in every program on our campus. And that's yet another reason why I love to work in this program so much. I'm very grateful and proud to have been even a very small part of the work that Devon is now presenting to us and the work that she's achieved over the last 3 years. And I want to just publicly express my gratitude to Heidi for her mentorship of Devon. For me, it's the faculty-student relationship that truly is the heart of the Outstanding Scholars Program. And I'm really kind of by way of being a small registrar, I watch things go by. Well, tonight we get to watch Devon's presentation, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Heidi.
Thank you, Simon. All right, and now I would like to introduce you to the star of the evening, our brand new graduate of the University of Windsor's history program, Devon Fraser. And Devon, can you unmute yourself? I need to do that.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for attending.
There you are. Okay. So a lot is often said about the benefits for the Outstanding Scholars Program, but I would like you all to know what a tremendous privilege it has been for me to work with Devon these past few years and get to know her. Devon has done absolutely superlative work for many projects, and I've really loved getting to know her. And working with students like Devon is absolutely the best part of my job, and it's one that inspires me tremendously. And so I'm particularly thrilled to share this news that Devon has decided to pursue librarianship as her profession, and she's going to start her MLIS in the fall at Western. And Devon has never backed away from a challenge. I've given her stuff and said, this is really tough. This is really boring, but you will rise to this. This is part of scholarship. And she has been eager to learn and take on new things. And the quality of her work and her dedication to learning has impressed me deeply. And I think it will impress you tonight as well. So I am very honored to introduce Ms. Devon Fraser to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jacobs. Those were some amazing words. I really appreciate all that. Okay, looks like we're all set to go. All right, so good evening, everyone. As we've already stated, my name is Devon Fraser. I'm a graduating history major and a member of the Outstanding Scholars Program, working with Dr. Heidi Jacobs at Leddy Library. The subject of this presentation today is my capstone Outstanding Scholars presentation, Assumption College Through the Decades, which highlights the evolution of Assumption College from its inception in 1857 to its incorporation with the University of Windsor in 1963. Next slide, please. So for my final year of Outstanding Scholars, Dr. Jacobs encouraged me to take on a capstone project with a focus on using resources that would highlight local history and the amazing resources available at University of Windsor. I'd originally started off wanting to do a project on the diaries of Alexander Bartlett, who was a prominent Windsorite who was a founding member of the St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church and a devoted public servant with roles ranging from city clerk to police magistrate. But I couldn't settle on a really clear topic for my project. When I was searching around the SWOTA website, or the Southwestern Ontario Digital Archives, which has hundreds of digitized publications and photographs regarding the history of Windsor, Essex, I stumbled upon the publication New Library, 1958, which outlined the plans for what would eventually become the West Building of Leddy Library. The architectural firm that designed this new library, Pennington & Carter, employed my grandfather as an architect. This personal connection led me to delve deeper into the history of the library, which led into finding sources focused on the history of University of Windsor, sources which seemed to have a lot of potential for a project, one that I could have a thesis statement for. For this project, I wanted to give an informative overview of the history of Assumption College and how it evolved to become the University of Windsor. But I also wanted to highlight lesser known stories regarding Assumption's origins that helped to humanize its creation. During my research, I discovered many interesting stories about the origins of Assumption, many of which you can discover for myself by perusing my website, but I'd like to highlight a few that I found to be the most interesting. For my first story, I will be discussing the 1878 fire at Assumption College. On February 3rd, 1878, a fire broke out in the college, with students and teachers witnessing smoke billowing from the basement and the study room above it, causing a panicked rush out of the college. A teacher and 2 students who were trapped by smoke ended up breaking a window and jumping into a snowbank from the 2nd story. The Windsor Fire Department quickly sent a fire engine, but it became stuck in the deep snow.
Eva,
So the horses that
there's
were
pictures.
So the horses that were pulling this fire engine ended up panicking, and they proceeded to gallop away with the fire engine. Because they lacked any sort of real resources to actually put out the fire, Assumption's teachers and students, along with Sandwich and Windsor residents, banded together to put out the fire and save the college. Despite this chaos and confusion, there was only one reported injury from one of the students who had jumped into the snowbank and nearly lost a finger to this broken glass. The fire was believed to be caused by an unattended basement furnace that ignited a pile of cordwood, which spread to the basement ceiling. The fire and smoke damage was estimated to cost the college about $13,000 US today, but its insurance was expected to cover the costs. I find this story to be very interesting, not just because of the humor, with the fire engine being, galloped away by the horses, but because it really highlights how dedicated Assumption's faculty, students, and community were to ensuring its safety and its ability to continue as a local educational institution. So for my second story, we're going to be highlighting the impact of World War II on Assumption College. The president of the college at the time, Vincent Guinan, advocated throughout his tenure that Assumption students would be able to complete their education despite the war. In particular, he advocated that Assumption's Canadian and American students should be able to complete their military training at Assumption College, rather than having to interrupt their studies to train at a military institution. He also worked to ensure that American students studying at Assumption would be exempt from the draft. Guinan further ensured the preparedness of Assumption's staff and students by creating and implementing evacuation plans, firefighting courses, first aid stations, and regular blackout and air raid drills, which showing the school as fully prepared for war. Aside from the existing issues of rationing and low staff and student numbers that affected its daily running, the war physically came to the college with the erection of army barracks on campus in Windsor, 1945. These barracks had been constructed to accommodate the large numbers of demobilized veterans from both the US and Canada, many of whom were students at Assumption before they were enlisted or were drafted. These barracks were constructed and refurbished as classrooms to ensure that the college had the facilities to properly teach these veterans. Assumption further made efforts to help demobilizing veterans by offering $400 room and board allowances for married veterans or those with families that, along with the Canadian government's $750 yearly allowances, made it feasible for veterans to start or to finish their post-secondary education. After the end of the war, Assumption completed the new Memorial Science Building, which was dedicated to the 121 Assumption College alumni, both staff and students, who had died during the war. This new building, along with other expansions, such as a larger gymnasium, a library, and a social science building, was funded in part by stipends paid by parents for Assumption's priests to say Mass for their children's safe return during the war. Memorial Hall still stands today as a testament to Assumption's community ties and the bravery and courage of its faculty and students. Assumption College during the Second World War highlights an emphasis on ensuring that individuals who had bravely served their country could return to civilian life more easily, along with memorializing those who had not returned from war. The final story that I would like to highlight today is the impact of the Athenian Raids on Assumption and on the Windsor area. The Athenians were a political organization that fought for an independent Ireland during the 19th and 20th centuries and frequently attempted to attack British landholdings, such as Canada, to pressure for their independence. Fears of Athenian raids into Canada as an attempt to pressure for Irish independence from Britain resulted in multiple companies of British troops being quartered at Assumption College by February 1864. With the end of the American Civil War in 1865, Fenians organized Confederate sympathizers in the northern United States near the border, resulting in additional garrisons of British troops at Assumption College in 1866 to protect the area. The presence of multiple companies of troops on campus must have affected the staff and students of Assumption. Sandwich residents, who were emboldened by exaggerated and false news of Athenian raids, organized impromptu militias to patrol the area day and night. In one of many similar instances, a cross-border ferry called the Union was seen going further down the river and closer to the Canadian shore than usual, which sparked fears of Fenian invaders. The ship's odd path down the river resulted in a large gathering of troops, local militia, and townspeople, all armed with any tools or weapons that they could find in order to respond to this possible invasion. However, word quickly spread that it was just a false alarm, and the ship had just gone slightly off course, resulting in this ad hoc militia looking very foolish. Much like the story about the fire at the college, the impact of the Fenian raids on Assumption highlights the determination and desire of the community to protect itself and its educational institution from both real and imaginary threats. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so in closing, I would like to thank Dr. Heidi Jacobs for her support and encouragement throughout this entire process, because without her, this project would not have existed. I'd like to thank Marcy Devons for her technical support for this presentation and her efforts to help publicize my project and this event. I'd like to thank Peter Zimmerman for his assistance with the construction of my website. I'd like to thank Dr. Simon Dutoit for his wonderful opening and for his support with the Outstanding Scholars program. This project also wouldn't have existed if not for him and his amazing program. Thank you to the staff members of Assumption University for their very kind and encouraging remarks, as well as their unrelenting support regarding my project. I'd also like to thank Dr. Cappucci ahead of time for his closing remarks. Thank you to my family and friends, and especially my parents, for supporting and motivating me throughout this entire project. Next slide, please. Okay, and finally, thank you to everyone here who's attended my presentation, and to everyone who's read the Daily News article about my project or who's looked at my website. I never imagined that my project would achieve this level of prominence, and I'm still so amazed that this presentation has attracted the amount of attention that it has. Thank you so much for your time.
Great, thank you so much, Devon. That was really great. Before we go to question and answer, I'm going to ask Dr. John Cappucci, who's the principal and vice chancellor of Assumption University, to offer a few words and closing remarks to Devon.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jacobs, and thank you very much, Devon, for a wonderful presentation. On behalf of Assumption University, I want to thank you, Devon, for your outstanding project on the history of our beloved institution. I was touched, and so are members of the board, to see someone take such an interest in our history and our heritage. In fact, when I reviewed this project and I went through every page of the website, as a good principal would, I was almost certain that it was the work of a graduate student, and I was pleasantly surprised to learn that an undergraduate student conducted this research-intensive project. The level of accuracy, the attention to detail, the use of primary sources, and the precise bibliographic citations all pointed to the work of a very meticulous and gifted student. And I'm very pleased that you'll be pursuing graduate studies in library science next year. I was also very personally touched and impressed with the comprehensiveness of the project, given that it spanned well over 100 years and tackled some challenging times in the history of not only Assumption University, but the world as well. And you highlighted that with the Athenian Raids and, of course, World War I and World War II with the establishment of the army barracks. Devon has captured all the challenges that existed during this long period of history, from the arrival of the Jesuits in the mid-19th century, and I encourage you to take a look at those slides, they're quite fascinating, to the invitation of Father Dennis O'Connor and the Basilians, to the construction of the Army Barracks, which you mentioned this evening, and of course to the birth of the University of Windsor in the 1960s. When I was going through the project, I actually chuckled when I read how Devon was able to capture the, let's just say, interesting relationship between Bishop Fallon and Father Forster. Fortunately for me, that type of conflict between bishop and president or principal no longer exists, but I did chuckle when I saw that. And lastly, I want to extend my warm congratulations to Dr. Heidi Jacobs for her leadership and her supervisory role in this project, and of course to my friend Dr. Simon Dutoit and the Outstanding Scholars Project, which gives many gifted students opportunities to research and make lasting contributions to scholarship. So Devon, on behalf of all of us at Assumption University, I want to congratulate you on this great achievement. We are very proud of you. You have certainly brought honor to Assumption's past and inspiration to our future by embodying our motto of teaching goodness, discipline, and knowledge. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Cappucci. That was really great. So now I'd like to turn things over to you. Just a reminder, if you could turn your mics off and your cameras, that would be helpful for everyone. And so if you want to add your questions to the chat, we can work through those. Maybe we'll start, Devon, with a question. Can you talk a little bit about some of the resources that you used to build this site? Maybe we can start with that question.
Sure, of course. I think one of the resources I most heavily relied on was the work of George McMahon. His book, I mainly relied on his book, Pure Zeal, A History of Assumption College from 1870 to 1946. I honestly could have done the entire project just based on his work alone. It's so amazingly detailed and informative about Assumption's early years and its evolution. I also used a lot of information from Michael Power's book, Assumption College, The Making of a Modern School, from 1890 to 1919. And I also relied a lot on his article, Fallon versus Forster, The Struggle Over Assumption College from 1919 to 1925, which really helped highlight, as Dr. Cappucci mentioned, their sort of antagonistic relationship between the bishop and the president of Assumption College at the time. I also relied on John Joseph Kelly's book, Mary's Men and Women, The History of Assumption College High School in Windsor from 1870 to 1995. It was, although it was mainly focused on the high school, it was very helpful to get more information about the early history of Assumption, especially its use of letters and articles from the individuals who worked at Assumption during the time. And finally, I relied on William Joseph Roach's Golden Jubilee, Assumption College, 1870 to 1920, which was an early history of Assumption, and that was written by its staff and students for its 50th anniversary. And I feel like it also helped to kind of humanize the work that I did. I also used a lot of information from the online historical newspapers that the University of Windsor allows access to, such as the Toit Free Press and the Windsor Daily Star. And the majority of my project was based on work from the SWOTA website, or the Southwestern Ontario Digital Archives, which had a lot of digitized images and articles about the history of Assumption College, Assumption University, and its evolution into the University of Windsor, which was an excellent source for this project.
So Dr. Cappucci was right in the thoroughness of your research. That was really, really impressive. And I think Catherine is here, so we'll just give a shout out to Catherine Hall, who has done absolutely superb work with SWOTA. So I have another question for you. This is from Lily. Has your research on Assumption College impacted your view of Windsor or the University of Windsor? And if so, how?
Oh, I really think working on this project has really made me appreciate just the history that's at the university. Because, like, say, for example, in non-COVID times, I pretty much had all of my classes at Dillon Hall, being a history major. And so you'd end up walking through the main doors, which would have Assumption, like the information about Assumption right on the top of the building. And just walking through there, you wouldn't give it a second thought. You wouldn't really realize the amount of history and all these stories that have come through this building. So I really feel that working on this project, I've had a much greater appreciation for the university that I've attended and the sort of the history and the stories that are connected with the very buildings and the very ground that we all walk on.
Great, thank you. Another question from Krista. Apart from these 3 stories profiled today in your presentation, what was a finding in your research that was most interesting or surprising to you?
Ooh, it's a very good question. I don't know. I really think just a lot of I think I didn't really know a lot about the history of Assumption College. I think a lot of times the stories you hear about University of Windsor are kind of just like, oh, it's University of Windsor, and there's not really a lot of context given to the sort of prehistory of like where it came from. I think personally, I'd say a lot of the sort of battles between Bishop Fallon and Father Forster in the 1910s and 1920s seemed very interesting to me because the relationship became just so antagonistic throughout, I think, almost at least over like 2 decades. So I think it was really interesting just how that relationship helped to shape Assumption College and Assumption University, and which in turn affected the University of Windsor. Because if some of these battles had gone different ways, the University of Windsor, as we know it today, might not exist.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting too. Excellent. Okay. Dr. Dutoit has a question here too. Did you observe changes in the relationship between faith and learning over the years?
It's a very good question. Well, I think that I found a lot of the time, I think really in my research, obviously the early years Assumption it's a very religious-based organization. They're preparing their students for really the priesthood. And that I think there was sort of a gradual evolution over the years to kind of offer more programs, like from the sciences, different programs like that, to just ensure that its students were really capable and academically, socially, and really all aspects to be prepared for either the secular or the priestly life. So I think it's really just an evolution in just sort of their more broadening of their focus regarding academia and things like that.
Okay, great. Thank you. A question from Dr. Cappucci. Building on his comment, he's wondering who you found to be the most fascinating figure in the history of Assumption College.
That's a very difficult question because I think there's just so many there's so many interesting people in this history. I think like really Dennis O'Connor, just his work to sort of help really modernize Assumption College was very interesting. But I think I will have to say Bishop Fallon and just his antagonism and his battles with Forster, I think really that relationship really shaped, again, as I said, it kind of shaped how it's really affected the sort of future of the college and the University of Windsor, and that all other sorts of battles over things like possibly moving the arts college up, the arts program up to London, and just different issues like that, where that if these things if Bishop Fallon had won a few more of these battles, then the University of Windsor wouldn't exist, or it wouldn't be at the level that it is today.
Okay, great, thank you. There's another question about, can you talk a little bit about the impact of being an outstanding scholar on your university life and or your studies?
Okay. Well, I think honestly, being in the Outstanding Scholars Program has completely altered the entire path of really like my future in general. Because as a history major, I absolutely love my program, but I find it's a very broad degree, and so there's so many different things that you could really do with it. And I think as I was getting further into my degree, I was less and less sure exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't have any sort of clear career path. I thought maybe I should just get a master's in history. But then what do I do with that afterwards? Do I work in a museum? I'm not really sure. But I was very lucky to be able to get into the Outstanding Scholars Program in my second year. And really by chance, I met Dr. Jacobs at one of the trainings, and she offered that if I didn't have anyone to work with, then I could work with her. And so I took her up on the offer. And really working with Dr. Jacobs and being able to work on projects such as the Breaking the Color Barrier or the stories of like race and gender in sports, I think it's really shown me just how incredible librarianship is, and just the people I've been able to meet from individuals from the Center for Digital Scholarship to people working in the archives, I've really seen just how diverse the field of librarianship is. And it's really sort of ignited a spark in me to pursue librarianship as a career. And so now, because of Outstanding Scholars and because I've worked with Dr. Jacobs, I feel extremely confident in actually pursuing library studies as my career. And so I think, as Dr. Jacobs or Dr. Toit mentioned, I will be pursuing my master's in library sciences at Western University in the fall. And so really all of this, and even again, as I mentioned, this project, it's all because of my work with Outstanding Scholars and with Dr. Jacobs. And so without any of that, I wouldn't be in this position that I am today.
Well, librarianship is very, very excited to have you as a future librarian. So this is a win for us. Leddy Library is really thrilled about that. So other questions from people? Let's see.
Isabel, I'm really, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask, how was, this was sort of your first experience working with a digital format, like building, you've done the research. What was it like turning it into a visual thing? Or what does this website do for you, do you think? Or the subject?
Okay, well, I think the process of turning this into sort of a digital source, I think it was, I don't know, I wouldn't say difficult. I think it was more challenging than anything, because I really never worked with a digital medium such as this. So I heavily relied on working with you, Dr. Jacobs, or with Peter Zimmerman and some other individuals from the Center for Digital Scholarship. Really helped me to shape this website into something that would be, visually intriguing, but also informative and engaging. But I really think that using the sort of online medium and having it, it's digital, I think it really increases the sort of access that for my work, rather than just, maybe having some sort of article in a journal, which, only specific people in a certain field would read about. And I think I'm very grateful to Marcy and the Daily News for publicizing my project, which is also, again, because it's digital, it's really helped to sort of amplify the amount of people who normally wouldn't have seen my project.
Right, exactly. Yep, that's great. So, Alice, any other questions that we have coming in?
These have all been really interesting questions so far. They're slightly challenging at times, but
here's another one. What kinds of reaction have you received from the public at large from your project?
Well, I think really the reactions that I've personally seen myself have been limited to like maybe my friends and family, or I shared this project on my social media and sort of the responses from my friends on there. But I think it's been overwhelmingly positive, and I'm extremely grateful for all of this. So I think it's again, as I said in my closing, I'm still absolutely amazed that the amount of people who are attending this, and that people have read my news article or looked at my website. This is absolutely incredible. And I think just as an undergrad and having this sort of almost stage, and like the stage to kind of speak on, and have this sort of like, this all feels very professional. It feels that, again, I think as Dr. Cappucci mentioned, it almost feels like this is something a graduate student would have. And so as an undergraduate, I feel so honored and so lucky to have this opportunity.
Well, you've certainly risen to this too. It's not everybody. Poor Devon, we kept going, oh, we'll just invite everybody to your presentation. And, so it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think, oh, here's one. Oh, and Beth Oakley is a nice comment from her. And I will echo this. You make the university very proud, for sure. I think I don't want to keep everyone gets a little Zoom fatigued. But I would like to thank. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was going to say there's a question from Krista. So she's asking if I picked up some digital design skills as part of my project. I think I kind of did, because the Omeka website, which this website is based on, it's sort of like an HTML based, so it's all text based. And so I think it was a lot of sort of trial and error, figuring out how to properly format things, even just like making sure my text all looked nice, and honestly figuring out how to make sure my footnotes looked properly. That was an ordeal. But I think it was interesting just to kind of figure out. I think, again, I've never worked with this sort of online like digital medium. So I think it is a nice sort of skill to, add to my resume. So, and I think I really enjoyed,
Absolutely.
figuring this out. So
Yeah, and it really takes your research into beyond just a research paper, which one or two or 10 people might read, and it will live on for quite a while. So I would like to thank everybody for coming and thank Devon very much for her presentation, Dr. Dutoit and Dr. Cappucci for coming. And there's all sorts of really lovely comments coming, and I think these are all very well deserved. So I will thank you all for coming, and we will leave it there. So have a great night, everybody. Stay safe. Enjoy the spring. Take care.